Welcome to today's deep dive. You brought us a really heavy but honestly brilliant piece of audio today, and we are so glad to be digging into it with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I mean, the source material you sent over is just packed.
It really is. We're looking at a recorded sermon that essentially puts a mirror right up to our faces. It tackles a struggle I think basically every single human being faces at one point or another.
Absolutely.
We're talking about that gap between our outward appearances, that polished, perfect face we show the world, and our actual everyday behavior when nobody is watching.
All right, the stuff behind closed doors.
Exactly. So our mission today is to explore how a collection of ancient texts from the books of Micah, 1 Corinthians, and Matthew actually diagnose this timeless human flaw. But we aren't just here to, admire the problem. We want to extract the practical nuggets of wisdom these texts offer for living a genuinely good life.
And it is a fascinating collection of material you sent over because it completely refuses to let anyone off the hook.
Yeah, no free passes here.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
The speaker in this recording doesn't just point out hypocrisy. They dissect the deeply ingrained human tendency to try and buy our way out of moral responsibility.
Yes.
And what makes this analysis so compelling is how it takes us from ancient Middle Eastern history right down to the modern-day pavement of your own neighborhood.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want you to imagine a highly unusual ancient courtroom scene to kick things off. This comes right out of the source audio, specifically the book of Micah, chapter 6. The prophet Micah paints this vivid picture where God is calling court into session. But this isn't happening in some grand marble building with wooden benches and a judge's gavel.
No, it's way bigger than that.
Right. It is happening entirely out in the open. God is lodging a formal legal charge against his own people, Israel, and he summons a jury to hear the case.
And the detail that really stands out here, the real aha moment of this opening scene, is exactly who makes up that jury.
Yeah, it's wild.
God commands the people to stand up and plead their case before the mountains. He tells the hills to hear what the people have to say. The everlasting foundations of the earth are the jury.
The actual literal landscape.
Exactly. And if you pause and think about it, why the mountains?
Because they've been there forever.
Right. They have been around since the very beginning of the covenant. They have stood completely still while generation after generation of humans have risen and fallen.
Yeah.
Everything that has ever been done on earth has been done right in front of them. They are the perfect ancient witnesses to human behavior because they have seen enough to actually testify.
I find that imagery incredibly powerful. The landscape itself is sitting in judgment. And then we get God's opening statement, which honestly is completely surprising.
Really subverts expectations.
It does, because given the buildup of a cosmic courtroom, you might naturally expect fire, brimstone, and just raging anger. But the audio notes how God isn't raging here at all.
No, he's not.
He sounds heartbroken. He is pleading with them, saying, "My people, what have I done to you? How have I burdened you? Answer me."
Yeah, it's so vulnerable.
And then he goes on to recount their shared history. He reminds them of how he brought them up out of Egypt, how he personally redeemed them from the land of slavery. He lists the leaders he specifically sent to guide them: Moses, Aaron, and Miriam.
He even brings up very specific historical events to jog their memory. The speaker points out that God asks them to remember the counsel of Balak, the king of Moab, and the answer of Balaam.
Right, which might sound obscure to us today.
Exactly. So for a little context, Balak was the king who actually hired the prophet Balaam to curse the Israelites. But God intervened and forced Balaam to bless them instead.
It was a massive moment of divine protection.
It was. And then God tells them to remember their long journey from Shittim to Gilgal. Again, to understand why that matters, Shittim was their final camp before crossing the Jordan River.
Right.
And Gilgal was their very first camp inside the Promised Land. It represents the exact moment they transitioned from decades of wandering in the desert to finally receiving the promise.
So he's laying out all the receipts.
Basically, yeah. But the purpose of this historical recounting isn't for God to just brag about his resume. It is God asking them to remember who he has been to them, to remind them of his righteous protective acts.
But wait, if God has this incredible track record of protecting and providing for them, why on earth would he need to drag his own people into a courtroom to defend themselves in the first place? What did they actually do?
To understand that, we have to look closely at the historical context the speaker provides for the 8th century BC.
Okay.
It was a terrifying time geopolitically. The mighty, ruthless empire of Assyria is breathing down the necks of Israel and Judah, literally threatening to wipe them off the map.
An existential threat.
Huge threat. But the prophet Micah makes it clear that the real existential threat isn't just the invading army outside the walls. It is the internal rot inside the society.
Yeah, the cultural decay.
Exactly. The culture is completely plagued by systemic injustice. You have wealthy, powerful landowners aggressively grabbing land and stealing fields from vulnerable families.
And nobody stops them.
Because the political leaders are entirely corrupt. They're actively taking bribes to look the other way. The marketplace is full of dishonest scales, meaning everyday consumers are being cheated just trying to buy a loaf of bread.
Right.
And perhaps worst of all, the religious prophets, the people supposed to be speaking for God, are essentially on the payroll.
Wow.
They are preaching only what the wealthy elite pay them to say, completely ignoring what God is actually demanding.
So it's just total moral collapse across the board. But here's the part that I find so jarring from the source audio. The speaker points out that despite all of this blatant systemic corruption, the people hadn't abandoned religion at all.
Not even a little bit.
In fact, it was the exact opposite. They were meticulously going to the temple.
Yeah.
Their religious look was absolutely flawless.
Yeah, they were checking all the boxes.
They were bringing their offerings exactly as prescribed by the law, but their daily lives, specifically their treatment of the poor and the vulnerable who were being actively trampled in the streets, were completely disconnected from the heart of the God they were claiming to worship.
That is the great irony.
Yeah.
And it is exactly what prompts this cosmic trial. It is a society steeped in economic exploitation that is simultaneously dressed up in religious hypocrisy.
Yeah.
The gap between their pristine performative worship and their cutthroat daily lives had just drifted entirely too far apart. So God calls them out in front of the mountains to expose that gap.
Okay, so God lays out this incredibly airtight, heartbreaking case. How did the people respond? When they are finally given the floor to speak in their own defense, you would naturally assume they might drop to their knees and say, you know what, you are entirely right.
Right, you'd expect repentance.
You'd expect them to say, we are so sorry, we have oppressed our neighbors, we have stolen land, we have forgotten you. But they don't do that, not even close.
No, they don't.
Instead, they try to negotiate.
What's fascinating here is how this reaction exposes a core, universal human fallenness. It is a very specific kind of brokenness dressed up in religious clothing.
Yes.
Instead of actually repenting, instead of acknowledging the harm they've caused and changing their behavior, the people try to buy God off. They start bargaining with him.
Yeah.
And it turns into this rapid, frantic escalation of material things.
It really does sound like a frantic auction in the text. They start off by asking, with what shall I come before the Lord? Shall I come with burnt offerings, with calves a year old?
Which is standard procedure.
Right, that's normal. But then they immediately up the ante. Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams? With 10,000 rivers of oil?
It just escalates so fast.
And then it reaches this absolute horrifying peak. They say, shall I offer my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul?
Exactly. It is a terrifying escalation that shows a complete and utter misunderstanding of what God actually wants from them. They genuinely think God's main concern is simply the size of the payout.
Like a bribe.
Yes. They have reduced the living, relational God to a transactional idol who can just be bought off with bigger and bigger bribes. And as horrific as that offer of the firstborn sounds to us today, the speaker notes a crucial historical detail.
Right. What were the neighbors doing?
In the 8th century BC, neighboring pagan religions were actually doing exactly that. The Israelites were essentially looking around at the surrounding culture, seeing what extreme measures worked for other groups, and offering to do the very same thing.
Wow.
They are throwing out the most extreme, painful material sacrifices you can imagine, all to avoid doing the one thing God actually wants.
Which is changing how they treat other people.
Exactly.
Let's pause on that psychology for a second, because the sermon brings us right to your front door. It is so easy to judge ancient people for offering rivers of oil. But have you ever tried to bargain your way out of a real apology?
Oh, absolutely.
Have you ever tried to buy your way out of changing a toxic behavior? It is such a subtle trap. When there's a real issue in your life, a broken relationship you caused, a bad habit, or a system of injustice you are comfortably benefiting from, do you ever respond by just adding more activities instead of addressing the root issue?
That is the exact parallel the speaker is drawing. We do the exact same thing, just with modern currency.
Yeah.
The psychological instinct to bargain hasn't changed in 3,000 years. The sermon gives these incredibly relatable, piercing examples. Maybe you realize you have been deeply uncharitable to your spouse or overly harsh with your kids.
Right.
But instead of sitting down, looking them in the eye, and doing the agonizing work of saying, I was wrong and I am sorry, you try to balance the cosmic scales by reading another Christian leadership book.
Right. Or maybe you hope that posting an inspiring Bible verse on social media will somehow magically cover over the fact that you routinely gossip and tear down your coworkers behind their backs. Or you volunteer to serve on 3 different charity committees, convincing yourself that your busyness makes up for the fact that you actively avoid the specific neighbor next door who truly needs your physical help.
It's just a distraction.
It is the exact same bargaining instinct Micah was calling out. We offer more money in the offering plate, perfect church attendance, or endless volunteer hours, all to avoid addressing the internal transformation that actually needs to happen. We would rather write a massive check than give up our pride.
Because writing a check or volunteering for an hour leaves your ego intact.
Wow, yeah.
True repentance shatters the ego. It is a tough question to face. Where in your life are you currently trying to pay God off with busy work instead of letting him transform you from the inside out? But God, acting as the judge in this outdoor courtroom, completely rejects this frantic bargaining.
He shuts it down.
He does. He doesn't want the calves, he doesn't need the thousands of rams, and he certainly doesn't want rivers of oil. Instead, he issues a final verdict, which is found in Micah 6:8. It says, He has showed you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because on the surface, that sounds like a lovely, simple bumper sticker.
Very cross-stitchable.
Exactly. There are no complicated new programs to launch, no massive theological textbooks to memorize. But as the speaker points out, while these 3 calls to action are simple to say, they are impossibly deep and difficult when you actually try to live them out on a Tuesday afternoon.
They require everything.
Let's look at the deep, street-level meaning of these 3 phrases, starting with doing justice. When you hear the word justice today, you probably think of a courtroom, legal correctness, or making sure wrongdoers get punished.
Yes, but the Hebrew concept of justice used in Micah is far broader and much more active than just punitive law. It isn't just about avoiding wrongdoing yourself.
Right, it's not past.
Not at all. You can't just sit in your house, follow the rules, and say, well, I haven't actively robbed anyone today, so I am doing justice. True justice in this context is the active, intentional restoration of what has been bent or broken in society.
Okay.
It is about straightening the crooked roads so that goodness and resources can actually reach everybody. And specifically, the text focuses heavily on the people who are the easiest for society to overlook and the easiest for the powerful to exploit.
The widow, the orphan, the immigrant, the poor.
Exactly. Doing justice means actively making things right for those who have been continually wronged.
But what does that actually look like for you right now in your daily routine? The audio gives us some fantastic modern translations of this ancient concept. Doing justice today might mean speaking up in a corporate meeting when a coworker is routinely talked over, marginalized, or mocked.
Yes, using your voice.
It means using whatever leverage or privilege you have to shield someone else. It might mean refusing to participate in gossip that actively harms someone's reputation when they aren't in the room to defend themselves.
That's a huge one.
Or, thinking back to those corrupt 8th century land grabbers, today it might look like advocating for a neighbor whose landlord is taking advantage of them. It is highly practical, roll-up-your-sleeves kind of work.
Exactly. It requires getting involved. And that leads perfectly into the second requirement, which is to love kindness, or in some translations, to love mercy.
Okay, break that down.
This goes so far beyond just using polite words or having generally good manners. The specific word used here relates to a deeply loyal, merciful, covenantal love. Think of it as the I do in a marriage vow.
Oh, I like that.
It is the kind of fierce commitment that remains steadfast even when the other person is at their absolute worst and least lovable.
That distinction is crucial. It is unconditional love in action. It is the stubborn refusal to give up on someone, which mirrors God's stubborn refusal to give up on Israel even when they were offering rivers of oil to avoid him.
Yeah.
And crucially, it is an action verb, not just a warm feeling in your chest. You don't just feel kindness, you have to physically execute it. The speaker suggests that loving kindness at street level might mean doing the agonizing work of forgiving a family member who has deeply disappointed you.
Which is incredibly hard.
It's exhausting, choosing the exhausting path of reconciliation instead of just nursing the wound and cutting them off. It might mean staying faithful and present through a really dark, difficult patch in a marriage. Or it means continuing to show up for a friend who is struggling with addiction or mental health, even if they have let you down multiple times in the past.
Which brings us to the third and final requirement of the verdict. Walk humbly with your God. The imagery Micah uses here is brilliant. We all inherently know what walking is, but adding the word humbly changes the entire physical posture of how you move through the world.
It really does. The sermon uses an analogy that perfectly captures the shift in posture. Walking humbly is described as walking carefully and attentively, like someone navigating highly uneven ground on an incredibly icy day.
I love this analogy.
Think about how you naturally walk when the sidewalk is covered in black ice. You are hyper-aware of every single step. You are careful so you don't fall, but you are also paying incredibly close attention to other people, the environment, your surroundings.
Right, you're not distracted.
You are making absolutely sure you don't slip, crash into someone, and hurt them.
It is the exact opposite posture of the people we saw earlier who were offering 10,000 rivers of oil. Those wealthy elites in Micah's day were walking with arrogant strides.
Yeah, just stomping around.
They are stomping around the city entirely unconcerned with who they step on because they assume they have enough money and religious clout to just buy their way out of any damage they cause.
How much oil do you want to make this broken family go away?
Right. That is arrogant walking.
Yeah.
Walking humbly means recognizing you are entirely bankrupt. You can't buy your way out of your moral failures. You have to pay close attention to the fragile people around you and to the God who is guiding you.
I love the moment in the recording where the speaker actually stops and asks the audience for real-life examples of what walking humbly looks like, and someone in the crowd just yells out, "Taking out the garbage!"
Yes.
And the speaker wholeheartedly agrees, because it is true. Walking humbly is doing the unglamorous, unseen things without exposing yourself or demanding praise for it. It might mean proactively admitting that you were wrong in an argument before you are backed into a corner and forced into an apology.
Yeah, beating them to the punch.
It might mean consciously choosing to listen more than you talk in your conversations today. Or it could be as simple as starting and ending your day by reflecting and asking, where did I walk with you today, God, and why did I walk away?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of the source material you provided, the speaker brings in two other major texts, one from 1 Corinthians and one from the Gospel of Matthew, to show that this concept of upside-down humility isn't just an isolated idea floating around in the book of Micah.
It's a running theme.
It is a unified, recurring theme. In 1 Corinthians, we read this profound argument that the message of the cross is considered absolute foolishness to the outside world. The text notes that Jews look for miraculous signs of power, and Greeks look for philosophical wisdom and debate. But God intentionally bypasses all of human expectation.
Right. The Apostle Paul writes that God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise, and he chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God deliberately picked the lowly, the despised, and the things that are completely disregarded by society to nullify the things that are highly valued. Why? So that no one may boast before him. It completely strips away those arrogant, heavy strides we were just talking about. You can't strut into God's presence bragging about your rivers of oil or your corporate resume when God has specifically chosen the weak to lead the way.
And we see this exact same upside-down kingdom logic completely embodied in the Gospel of Matthew, specifically in the famous passage known as the Beatitudes. Jesus goes up on a mountainside, sits down, and begins to teach the crowds.
Notice the parallel there. He's teaching from a mountain.
Echoing the mountain jury from Micah. And who does Jesus declare to be blessed? He doesn't bless the wealthy landowners, the influential politicians, or the powerful religious elite, the exact people society usually celebrates and rewards.
Not at all. He flips the entire value system on its head. He says, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are the meek, blessed are the merciful, blessed are the pure in heart, blessed are the peacemakers, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness.
It's staggering.
It is a total radical inversion of human standards of success. Jesus is directly blessing the exact people who are quietly living out the verdict of Micah 6.8, the merciful, the humble, the meek, who are hungering and thirsting for justice.
But the sermon acknowledges a very real, practical problem that we have to address. These requirements, while beautiful to read, can feel completely overwhelming to execute.
Yeah, like how do I actually do this?
How does a normal person actually achieve this kind of lifestyle? How do you consistently choose to enact justice, extend unconditional kindness, and walk on the ice with humility when your basic human survival instinct is to just bargain, hoard your resources, and protect your own ego?
It goes against our programming.
It does. So to explain the mechanism for this kind of radical change, the speaker references a concept from a previous discussion in their community, calling it the 4.0 moment.
I am so glad they brought that up because it bridges the gap between theory and reality. For context, the 4.0 moment represents that highly specific conscious decision you have to make every single day.
Right.
Maybe it literally happens at 4.0 p.m. when you are exhausted, your day is falling apart, and you are tempted to lash out. It is the deliberate choice in that exact moment to pause and decide to abide with Christ.
That is the key. Abiding is positioned as the root of the entire tree. You cannot just grit your teeth and force yourself to generate pure justice and kindness out of sheer willpower.
You'll just burn out. You will burn out or turn into a hypocrite.
Right.
But when you make that daily 4.0 moment choice to abide, Christ's heart actually begins to shape your internal desires and your external choices. His passion for justice makes you genuinely want to pursue it for your neighbor.
Yeah.
His overwhelming kindness toward your own failures softens your hard heart toward the people who annoy you. His ultimate humility, the fact that he emptied himself and took the form of a servant, teaches you how to walk low to the ground carefully and attentively on that icy sidewalk of daily life.
The actions themselves, doing the justice, showing the mercy, walking with the humility, are just the fruit hanging on the branches.
Yeah.
The root system keeping the whole thing alive is the abiding.
Right.
If you don't have that root connection, you're just going to revert right back to offering rivers of oil, trying to buy God's favor through exhausting religious busywork. The true, lasting transformation has to happen from the inside out. So, to recap the incredible journey we have been on today through the notes you shared, we started out in an ancient outdoor courtroom where the everlasting mountains and hills served as the silent jury.
Witnessing everything.
We watched a corrupt society desperately trying to buy its way out of hypocrisy with thousands of rams and an endless frantic escalation of material wealth. And we followed that thread all the way down to the icy sidewalks of our own everyday lives.
Learning that true, lasting goodness can never be purchased with religious busywork or rivers of oil. It is about a fundamental root-level shift in how we carefully walk through the world.
This raises an important question, and it is the exact challenge the speaker leaves their audience with. If we listen to all this ancient wisdom, we can't just nod our heads at how interesting it is and move on with our day.
Right. What are we going to do about it?
The question is, what is one concrete step of justice, one actual act of mercy, or one physical move of humility that you can take this week? It is about bringing it out of the clouds and making it real. Will you consciously choose to listen to someone who frustrates you instead of arguing and talking back? Will you tell the absolute truth in a difficult situation at work, even if it costs you your reputation or financial bonus? Or will you finally find that quiet place in your home where you simply need to look someone in the eye and say, "I'm so sorry, I was completely wrong"?
Those are the uncomfortable questions that truly matter. And to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you process all of this, I want to build on that incredible opening imagery of the landscape acting as a witness.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine if the literal environment around you right now, the hills in your specific town, the streets you drive on every morning, the walls of your own living room, the desk you sit at in your office, if they were suddenly called to the witness stand today. Not to testify about your pristine public reputation,
Right.
and not to read aloud the things you post online for everyone to see. But if the landscape was called to testify about the invisible daily footprints of your private kindness and your quiet humility, what story would the landscape tell about you?
That's a powerful thought.
Thank you for trusting us with this deep dive into the audio you shared. We hope this exploration gives you something profound to think about as you step out into your week. Keep walking carefully, and we will see you next time.